I think a lot of that comes from, again, this idea that our way is the right way. And
Hmm.
this idea of common sense. I'm doing that with my air quotes, this common
Oh,
sense. And instead of being open to that other perspective, we feel like we have to defend a little bit more our position.
hmm.
And that's the challenge. That's why people are afraid of conflict, because it doesn't become a discovery session. It becomes like it gets personal. It gets
Hmm.
personal.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to this book, Think Again, which I just finished reading it, and that's why a lot of this is on the top of my head right now. Um, there's a whole chapter in here called The Good Fight Club that talks about conflict and how conflict arises, and what you can do around conflict. And so I want to go back to that idea of relationship conflict. Um, One of the whole premises of this entire book about Think Again is not getting stuck in these patterns of believing the biases, believing what you believe, and not being willing to rethink given new information. And again, this is where I think a lot of people in conflict and why people are afraid of conflict is I bring up what I think is a very valid point. And instead of hearing me, you dig your heels in to prove me wrong. And there's very rarely anything that has one right answer, right? With a few exceptions. Surgery, there's probably one right answer. Math, there's probably one right answer. But for a lot of other things that we look at in life, there's lots of different ways of seeing things. And I can be right, you can be right. We don't necessarily have to agree. So I want to read this one chapter or one paragraph that I think is really like the whole paragraph is so profound for me. Um, like the whole premise of the book of rethinking is not being a preacher, whereas a preacher, my beliefs are true. I'm going to preach them to you till you believe them. To not be a prosecutor, basically let me negate your whole idea, and to not be a politician who um, we dismiss or talk around anything that doesn't agree with us. So to be more of a scientist where you're constantly checking in, what evidence do we have? Let me rethink my hypothesis. That's like the whole premise of the book. So in the idea of relationship conflict, it says relationship conflict is destructive in part because it stands in the way of rethinking. When a clash gets personal and emotional, we become self-righteous preachers of our own views, spiteful prosecutors of the other side, or single-minded politicians who dismiss opinions that don't come from our side. Task conflict can be constructive when it begins diversity of thought, preventing us from being trapped in overconfidence cycles. It helps us stay humble, surface doubts, and makes us curious about what we might be missing. It can also lead us to think again, moving us closer to the truth without damaging our relationships. So I bring that whole paragraph in because the type of conflict that we want to see, the healthy conflict, is that task conflict where we can talk about the work and the process and the idea of getting things done without it becoming personal. And in order to be able to do that in a healthy way, there has to be relationship work on the relationship part of it. And I think that's the big challenge. Um, and so it's like, where do you start? And my immediate thought is you start with building trust in the relationships. And so if you come and you have an alternative perspective, I'm not taking it personal. And so this is complex. This is the hardest part because we're wired to be defensive, to push back on anything we don't already believe to be true. And again, that emotional part of it where I do take things personal. And I start to formulate stories about the other person's intentions, aptitudes, uh, what they're trying to do. It's very seductive to think the worst of somebody else. And so I think in any type of healthy relationship, it boils down to the idea of communication. I've got to be willing to put myself out there to tell my truth, but at the same time, I have to be willing to hear the truth of another person, be able to consolidate that. And what I think gets in the way of those type of meaningful conversations is the blame and defensiveness. Going back to the drama triangle, it's the blame and defensiveness. And so instead of us communicating with each other about the relationship things in a fact-based way or a behavior-based way, we don't want to rock the boat. So we simmer, simmer, simmer until we boil over. And then we have a really unhealthy conflict conversation. And then that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. It's not easy to get over that. I know I'm a Scorpio. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I'm a Scorpio. I can hold a grudge for life. If you've crossed me one time, chances are I've written about you in my diary. There may not be redemption unless we work it out, right? I have taken names out of the book of people I hate because we've hashed things out. We've had a good discussion. I can see where they're coming from, but that takes a bit of humility on both sides to be open to those types of discussions. And I'd like to be the first to say, not everybody's ready to have those types of conversations. I know with my spouse, my partner, it took us years to get to the point that we are now, that when we have a little tiff, a lot of times we just need a few moments to like let the emotional temperature come down, and we trust each other enough to say, when you said this to me, this is what it made me think, and that's why I snapped back, and I shouldn't have snapped back, but I did. But this is what I was thinking. What did you mean by that? Like, can you give me a little bit more information? And okay, I hear what you're saying. Next time, here's a better way to tell me that. Here's a better way to share that with me so I don't take it so personally. And we hear each other. It's not like, oh, they're trying to control me. No, it's like, I can tell you what I need because I trust that you want to meet me there. And I'm willing to hear what you need from me and meet you there, even if it's not my preference, even if it's not the way my go-to approach, but that's what you need from me. I care about this relationship enough to adapt to that. Now, we're not like, there's not as much intimacy in your workplace relationships. At least there shouldn't be that same level of intimacy in your workplace relationships. But there still can like be a mimic of that where we communicate with each other in a way that lets other people know, like, I trust you enough to be vulnerable and tell you what I need and hope that you can meet me there so that we can have that healthy task conflict when it comes up and it doesn't feel personal. I don't have to like you. I don't have to like you as a person. I don't have to hang out with you on breaks. We don't have to go to happy hour, but I can still have enough professional trust in you that I can have those conversations and we resolve it versus another check mark on your name of reasons why I can't stand you and why you're not trustable. Like, we have to be willing, but the challenge is for us to be able to have those meaningful relationship-based conversations. There has to be a genuine interest from both sides to want to resolve the relationship conflict. And I think that as people, we're always skeptical that the other person is not being genuine. And so we ourselves are then on guard. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to be genuine as well. We stay on guard.
Yeah, if I trust you and you do me dirty, how is that going to affect me? Not just necessarily you, right? But me as a person. I can't believe I fell for that. I can't believe that I let somebody in and so very often trust issues aren't even with that other person. They start with us, right? And I mean, they come from so many different places, right? Past relationships, what we were taught about trust, and all those other things. I mean, adverse childhood experiences, the idea of common sense, right? And all those things, which ain't common, right? So, we take that idea of I'm trusting you, I'm being vulnerable, and then you do something that breaks my trust. I should have known better. I should have known better, right? As opposed to how do I help this person to recognize what they're doing that causes mistrust? It's I should have known better. I'm beating myself up for even allowing myself to fall for this person. I'm never going to let that happen again. So we build up walls. And we build up walls and webs that people have to crawl through and obstacles that they have to cross to prove to us that they deserve our trust. And then even when they cross those obstacles, it's like Ninja Warrior. You ever watch Ninja Warrior?
Yeah, I love Ninja Warrior. Yeah.
So they get through the first obstacle Then they have to do that obstacle again, get through the second obstacle. Then they get to the third obstacle, right? So, I mean, there's all these different criteria that are challenging, that are, you know, complicated. And how many people, by the time they get to the second or third obstacle, they're like, you know what, screw it. It's not worth it. I don't want, why do I have to keep proving to you that you can trust me when I've done all this work already to establish our relationship and you still don't trust me, right? You know, so I mean, it goes back to the personal, right? We
Yeah.
take it personal, and it really is, it's hard when, like you said, it takes two people to build a trusting relationship and to manage conflict. And if we are not prepared for that, and if we're in a leadership role and we don't trust people, how does that filter down?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Well, and this is where I think that the humility and the trust in ourselves and other people has to come out. I, again, I told you, I think last time, I do this informal survey. If someone had a challenge with you, do you want to hear it from them or somebody else? Almost universally, I want to hear it from that person directly. So let's have these conversations with each other. And they only will work if both parties, again, are open to the information. And sometimes they are, and it's very fruitful, and other times it's not. But it always starts with you and really kind of asking yourself about the conflict, about the situation, about the challenge. Like, what stories are you telling yourself? Like, can I really think about the situation? And if everything that you are saying about this conflict is because they did this and they said that and they should have done this, they should have done that, they should have, which you end up shitting all over yourself. You know, it's all of these like unfulfilled assumptions, kind of like the story you told about your wife and your daughter. Well, the assumption is if I call her, she answers. But if that's not part of their reality, then, you know, we're assigning blame to somebody for something that maybe they are not
Yeah,
aware of.
yeah,
And let's just be honest, just because I told you once doesn't mean it's going to change your behavior immediately, right? It takes time to adapt, and it's not from a lack of desire. It's just, it's hard to change your habits and your go-tos and your approaches, right? So with all of that being said, um, I think like the biggest shift for everybody, I'm myself included, I'm in this, is that I have to allow myself to be vulnerable enough to engage in a conversation, and I can bring up my concerns with what the other person is doing. And I have to be also open to them being able to share my contribution to that conflict. And we both adapt and change. Like it takes two to tango. And both person, obviously both people or multiple people, because conflicts can be more than two people. Um, if they stick to that side of I was right and they were wrong and they've got to apologize, they may not be open to their contribution, which then what stories is the other person telling? And are they true? Are they rooted in reality? Or again, are they the biases and assumptions that we put in place of what the other person should have been doing, or this is the right response? And we oftentimes are holding other people to a higher standard than we do for ourselves, right? So if I snap at you one day, if I snap at you one day, you come and say, "Hey Tiff, do you have a minute?" And I'm like, "I don't, Carl. Like you gave me 16 things to finish today. I don't have a minute. Like, why don't you go use your own critical thinking skills and try to figure your own stuff out and like let me get done the things that you made me do?" Like that is a conflict. But if I like self-righteously am like, well, Carl should know that I'm busy right now. Carl should know I don't have a minute. Carl should know that I'm overwhelmed. And how dare him bother me? I'm not taking ownership of the fact I could have responded to him differently. So if he comes and says, "Hey, you know, Tiff, when I asked you, you could have just said no. Like, I don't understand why you bit my head off." And if I don't just take ownership of that and say, "You know what, Carl, you're right. And, you know, when I have a deadline, I really like to work interrupted. How can we figure out a way for both of us to get our needs met? I shouldn't have bit your head off and I apologize for that. And I still want you to respect my work boundaries. How do we find a way that meets both of our needs?" Right? I have to own my part, even if it doesn't negate my challenge with him. but it still means that I have to take ownership. And a lot of people don't want to take ownership. They want to just make sure that the other person knows that they were wrong. And that's it. And once you say, okay, I was wrong, great. And I still keep it moving. The conflict was not resolved. Stop giving me so much work, Carl. It's too much. I'm just joking. Carl doesn't give me any work to do. No, don't worry. But it happens like that. I have my beliefs. I don't share those with the other person so that they can kind of see where I'm coming from as well. I'll give you a quick example of this. I love the phrase, the meeting after the meeting. Okay, the meeting after the meeting. So let's say management comes in and they're like, okay, everybody, we have this new initiative and we're looking at, our strategy is X, Y, and Z, and we're looking at moving in that direction. We want to hear from you all. How might that impact your day to day? How might that impact the way that you provide your services? What support are you going to need? And everybody's like, mm-mm, mm-mm. Like, I'm not saying anything, right? Because I gave a good idea in 1994 and nobody listened to me. So I'm not saying anything. Or the last time you asked for feedback, I gave you feedback and then you told me that I was wrong. So I've learned to not take the bait. So we stay quiet. We're asked for feedback. We don't offer it. And then we have the meeting after the meeting. Well, you know what they should do, Carl? They should do this. They should do that. And I don't understand why they're not doing this. And I don't understand why they're not doing that. But you know what? They never listen to us. We're not having the right conversations with the right people. And especially in relationship conflict, we're very rarely going to the person with whom we have the conflict. We're talking to anybody else who will listen to us about it. Oh my gosh, Carl, so-and-so is so unfair. So-and-so. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I can't even preach that I'm not one of those people. But a lot of times it's like, I need to get this, like, formulate my ideas about it. But if we're not taking that conversation back to the person, then does it really change anything?
Yeah.
We're good at talking about people, not really good at talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, by the way, we do talk to them and they don't hear us. And then we decide, you know what? I'm not wasting my words. They're not open to the feedback. Yeah. And that's where the grudges get written in permanent ink instead of pencil,
Yeah. Because I've tried. Well, I've tried. They don't want to hear me. Right. And, and so that's hard. It's, we can talk to other people because they're not emotionally involved in what we have to say, or they're on our side.
Right.
Right. And so because they are social, and what happens when you talk to somebody and then they say, well, have you listened to that other person? Oh, well, how many people say, well, I don't want to talk to that person. They're all of a sudden they're taking the other side of the argument. And no, I want them to agree with me. I want to know that I'm right. All right. Our brain wants us to have the right answer and the right solution without, just that surface level. We're just scratching the surface. We have to go deeper. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of introspection, right? It takes a lot of the ability to examine, like you mentioned, how do we contribute to this, right? And, very often we think we have the best intentions, right? I mean, how many times have you, just had just a normal intention and it completely backfired.
Yeah.
Right. And because our intention is we have this message we want to give out. So that's our intention. Right. But we judge ourselves by our intentions. We judge other people by their behavior.
Right.
Right. And so when I have an intention of, just even my communication style, it's, hey, what are you doing? Right. And the other person may want, well, why do you need to know? Right. That's just the beginning of a conflict.
Right.
Hey, what are you doing? Well, why do you need to know? Or we might even just, if our coworker sends us an email or an instant message, hey, what are you doing? I'm thinking about where we're going to lunch. What if our boss sends us that same message? Hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working on that report, and don't worry, you'll have it by 3:00, right? We have different understandings of people's intent that we come up with, right, based off of past history or our personal feelings of what are we doing, right? Are we doing something that deserves to be checked up on, or why are we, maybe, hey, I'm doing everything right. Why does this person need to check up on me? And maybe they're just asking, hey, do you have a second? I want to come in and, you know, talk to you about something, you know. So there's that lack of content. I mean, lack of context. You can't send me in my office for a minute and think we're going to the principal's office, right? And so, our intent may put people into a, like you mentioned, defensive. We are wired to be defensive, right? Safety danger. I'm going to my boss's office. I don't know why. So our brain fills it in with the worst case scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where those conversations become contentious or even just anxiety ridden when even before you walk into the office. Hey, you want to see me about something, boss? Yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about your vacation schedule. Oh my gosh, I thought I was in trouble. How often does
Right.
that happen? And you know providing that ability to fill in the blanks, right? No one likes a pop quiz, right? So hey, when you get a second, I want to talk to you, and in my office when you have, I just want to get your vacation schedule for the holidays. That's a totally different conversation I'm walking into now. It's not anxiety filled. It's not stress related. Even if it is, hey, I wanted to talk to you about what happened in the lobby the other day with that client. I just want to get your side of the story. Even if we know that we're going in to talk about something that's not pleasant, we can prepare ourselves to have that conversation rather than being emotional about it. Well, they came at me and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, so, okay, I need to talk. Well, this is what happened. This is what I observed. This is what I saw. This is how I responded, which is a different response than that pop quiz on the fly, having to think about all those different things that happened in that moment where we can get a fight, flight, or freeze response or
Mm-hmm.
fawn. There's the, the fawn. I think you mentioned that before, you know. But just how does that work? How do we prepare ourselves? And just think about where they come from, right? And we talked about the sources, right? Childhood experiences, acculturation. I mean, we all have red flags, right? We all have those little triggers that will put us into an emotional response, right? And that's a question, right? I have emotional response whenever I see anybody sagging their pants.
Yeah.
My first response is, pull up your pants, right? Why? My dad was a cop. And my dad taught me when I was a little kid, you're gonna wear a belt. You're not gonna dress like a criminal because saggy pants, big clothes. That's how they dressed in prison, right? To hide weapons, protect themselves. So it came out into Bay Area culture in the '80s, and he wanted to make sure that his only son was not going to dress like that. I carried that over into my job working, as a case manager in a welfare to work department. How many of my clients do you think walked through the door with their pants sagging? Right? And how easy would it have been for me to judge them based off of how they dressed because I'm hearing my dad in the back of my head. They're dressed like criminals. They're dressed like criminals. Right? And would I have given them the same fair shot as if they would have walked in with a collared shirt and khakis?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I know that's a red flag for me. So that's something I think about now. It's not, I don't know their story. I don't know why their pants are sagging. Maybe their belt broke. Maybe their girlfriend likes that. Maybe it's their style. It's not my style, but who cares?
Right.
Right. And, so, I mean, what's a red flag that you have, Tiff? What's a trigger that puts you into an emotional place where maybe if you're not careful, you can start making those judgments where your bias starts kicking in.
Hmm. I think one of my, mm, I think when it's confrontational, right? I think when someone, what feels to me confrontational or blameful or attacky, that's another not real word.
Mhm.
Attacky. I think that's where my it, where I feel I get defensive, right? I'm a human being. I make mistakes. I'll own them. That's one thing about me is if I'm doing something that I'm not supposed to be doing and you tell me, hey, this is bothering me when you do this, this is how I'm impacted. I hear that because as one of like my personality traits is I want to be good to people. I really do want to be good to people in the way that they want me to be good to them, you know? So when someone comes in or to give me feedback or to share and they are like, well, you're this or you're that, immediately I'm not taking you seriously because if you want to fight, let's go, right? Like if you want to fight, that's where I get emotional is like come to me as an adult and let's talk about it. If I hurt your feelings or I said something disrespectful to you, I honestly wouldn't do it intentional. But if I did, you say, you know what, when you said this, it hurt my feelings or this is how I took it. I'm immediately going to feel bad. I'm immediately going to be like, oh, I would never want that. And I'm sorry that I said that. I'm sorry that, had a negative impact on you. What do you want me to, how could I have said it better? Like, what do you need from me? I'm very open to that. But if you're like, you're just a bitch, Tiffany, and nobody likes you, I'm going to be like, well, actually, lots of people like me. And if you want me to be a bitch, you better buckle up because it's about to go down, right? Like I'll
Yeah.
prove you right. I'll prove you right. If you come to me in an attacking way, I'm gonna give you something to talk about. That's the emotional part. That's not healthy. Try not to
Hmm.
do that now, but that was my approach for a long time. Like you've got something negative to say, well, let me give you some evidence to back that up.
Hmm.
That's the red flag for me. I don't want to be that person, and so I will say that in my own development, it was getting my emotional intelligence together to not be so reactive. So
Hmm.
even in my home life, right? Because at home I feel like we're a little bit more vulnerable because even if we get it wrong, they're going to love us anyways. I think we treat the people we love a bit worse than we do
Yeah, we do.
strangers.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want that to be the norm in my household. I wanted the people that I loved to know that they were loved and cherished and, they're important to me. Um, and so it took a lot of developing that emotional intelligence to sense my emotion. Again, very reactive. I'm again Scorpio. But not saying astrology is real, but I'm very reactive, very emotional, very passionate. Um, I have a temper, definitely have a temper, and I have a quick wit. So if you piss me off, I'm gonna hurt your feelings. And that's not what I want to be known for. I don't want people to be like, "Oh, Tiffany, oh, if she likes you, she's great. But if you piss her off, she's gonna make your ancestors cry." That's not like the reputation
Yeah.
that I want. I don't. I want to be known as a kind, fair person who makes people feel good and their life is better because I was in it. Like that's the reputation I want to have, but it doesn't come to me naturally. It's again developing. I had to develop my own emotional awareness about myself and how I can come off and how my words can feel to other people. And that took some time to really like have some insight into how other people perceive me because of my intentions are always good. Let me just tell you the truth, Carl. But it comes off a bit overwhelming and aggressive. And I had to acknowledge that about me. And then the self-regulation. Like, I'm pissed off right now or I'm feeling attacked or I'm feeling defensive, maybe now is not a good time to have this conversation. And in my house, in my home with my loved ones, we have like communication around this. And so if something has just happened, we're gonna talk about it. But if we come to each other and we're like, you know what, I need to talk about what just happened, and the other person says, actually, not right now. I'm still processing, or not right now. I'm not in a space to be objective. We say, cool, let me know when you're ready because I'm ready to talk about it. But if you're not, I'll wait for you. And most of the time, it takes us just a few minutes, hours, a day or two to like bring that emotional temperature down, but we don't force it when people aren't ready. So I think about that in the workplace as well. If we're talking about like handling these relationship conflicts, just because I personally am in a space to maybe address it, but the other person is not, I don't want to take that as a fail. It's not they're not interested in solving it. Maybe it's just not a good time for them and they're still processing, right? Or figuring out what they want out of that relationship. And I need to try to not take that personal. And here's the other caveat I will say about, again, these triggers. Again, don't come at me sideways, right? If you got the audacity, I got the time. Let's go there. But I've really kind of tried to be like not match the energy. I think is like part of that emotional intelligence development. I can't say I'm successful at it all of the time. The old me comes out, the unhealed me comes out every now and then. But when I have the right like capacity, I'm always thinking about, okay, what's the end goal here? The end goal is I want to have a decent relationship. I don't have to like them. I don't have to be friends with them, but I do have to have a good professional relationship. And so what can I do to help establish that good professional relationship where we can work well together, even if I would never again send them a Christmas card, even if I would never invite them to my birthday party or say, let's go catch lunch. I can still have good professional relationships with people that don't have relationship conflict without making it deeper than sometimes they just need to stay superficial, and that's okay. But I have to trust them enough and have a good enough relationship where we can engage in task related conflict without it becoming personal. And that takes a lot of time and effort and energy. Can I just say time and effort and energy? But I do have a lot of good workplace relationships. I think I get along with almost every coworker that I have, with a couple exceptions. And I'm not going to say it's all them. I play a part in it too. It's just we haven't got to a point where we can let the guards down and actually resolve it. And I hope that someday we get there. It's just not today.
Yeah.
I'm open to it, just not today.
Yeah. And yeah, that's see in my conflict style, right? You know, we talk about the conflict styles, you know, the competitive, collaborative, right?
Accommodating.
Accommodating, avoidance, and then compromising. And if I'm not careful, I'll avoid conflict in a minute. I don't want to engage in conflict. If someone's coming at me sideways, I'll try to disengage from that conversation, right? If, you know, why are you being so aggressive? Well, maybe you need to calm down and then we can talk about this. And then we won't talk about it. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
or I'll go from avoiding to accommodating. Hey, so you were a little emotional, dude. I don't want that to happen. And so, you know, how can we have that conversation, right? And that's where I would like to go, right? But, you know, if I'm not careful, my natural style is to just delay or transfer. And that can really get in the way, right? You know, so it's not task related anymore. It's personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about this person. I have a difference in opinion on how things get done, or there's a performance issue and we need to improve it. It's, I don't like this person, or I don't think that they are worthy. They're not worth my time, not worth the energy, not worth the effort. So I'm going to just stay away from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And try to keep them away from me. Right. And that's healthy for sometimes. I mean, there's some folks you just do
Yeah.
not want in your life. But when you're in a workplace, when you are engaged 40 hours a week with people, right? Maybe even more sometimes, right? That's something that can really cause challenges to performance and to, you know, how we do what we do,
Yeah.
right? And it affects people in ways that they don't even know. Impact, you know, if eligibility and welfare to work don't get along, and they share the same clients, who suffers?
Yeah.
Client. The client doesn't get stuff done as fast as maybe they want. The stream of communication doesn't happen as well as they want. People don't have conversations about nuances that are happening. It's just, nope, this person's discontinued. This person is not compliant, right? And, well, they were just here and they were talking to me about these things. You know, maybe we should give them a couple. Well, no, if we have a relationship, that's a different conversation, isn't it? But if it's,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't know this person. So if I don't know this person, I don't like them, or they don't work as hard as me. So I'm just going to just take their information and move forward because we haven't really got to know each other. There's no trust. so we don't deal with conflict, then cut and dry. Let's get it done. Well, right. And so that happens just between workers, between individuals, between, you know, people in life. But as a leader, if you don't manage conflict with just one other person, how many other people that you're leading see, and what does it breed? What is the effect, right? Where that person is doing something that needs to be corrected and you're not correcting it,
Hmm.
right? And so do other people say, hey, look, our boss isn't saying nothing, but you need to hold your end of the bargain? How many people do that, right? As opposed to, well, they're not saying anything to them, so yeah, I guess that's just what they want this to be, just being unaccountable. So what does that do to people's level of, like we're going to talk about, commitment, right, and engagement, right? And so having that conversation, like you mentioned, to be more task focused, more behavioral focused, is so important, right? There's a model that I like to use, that even personally, which is called CBIA plus F, right? And
So many letters. Tell us about it.
yes, okay, well, so CBIA plus F is, a model that is based off of the SBI, situational behavior impact, right? But there's different levels to it, right? C stands for context, right? So I'm giving you context about the conversation. I'm setting the stage. Hey, I want to talk to you about what happened the other day. We were in the staff meeting and I said something and you rolled your eyes. And so I just wanted, or you muttered something in your breath, or you said something to your coworker, and they kind of smirked, and so just setting that stage. It's not, you've been having attitude lately, or I feel disrespected. What does it mean to have attitude? What does it mean to feel disrespected? My common sense has a different idea of what attitude is, what being disrespected is, than maybe yours, right? In
Mhm.
terms of some folks are confrontational. Why, you're aggressive? No, I'm trying to solve the problem, right? And so our idea of common sense ain't common. It's common to our upbringing, our experiences, and our relationships, right? And how we see the world, which is completely
Mhm.
different than everyone else. And so setting the context is, I want to talk to you about what happened. Then the B stands for the behavior, right? So I said this in the meeting, you rolled your eyes, you leaned over to your friend, and you said something that kind of made them smirk. I didn't want to bring it out in the bigger meeting. I didn't want to cause, an issue. It's not something I wanted to do publicly. I wanted to have the conversation with you. So that's the specific behavior. You've been late 7 times in the last 3 weeks, right? And you don't call, right? So then the I stands for impact. What is the impact of your behavior on me, maybe on other people, right? So the impact of you rolling your eyes, excuse me, and then leaning over and saying something to your coworker, making them kind of smirk while I'm talking about something that, is important, or, you know, something that we all, it's important for us to buy into, or, I've offered to have conversation and you didn't want to have open conversation. It makes me feel as if, this is something that, maybe didn't sit well with you, and I'd like to get your perspective on it, right? Or you being late all the time and not calling causes us to, not be able to staff people properly. We fall out ratio or whatever else it is. And so it affects people. We might have to call somebody in if if you're going to be late, and or we have to be on the floor. This affects administrative work that we might have to get done. And also the other impact is the rest of the staff sees you walking in 15, 20 minutes late every day. And if nothing gets said to you, well, then what are they saying? Hey, so why am I busting my tail to get here on time? When that person gets to walk in whenever they want, which causes dissension amongst the team, and also erodes your leadership, right? Your vision of who you are, and not being consistent, not being trustworthy. I can't trust that you're going to live up to those expectations you've set about being on time, or about having open conversations. So if you're not going to do it, then I don't trust it, right? So that's the impact. Excuse me. The impact of you saying something or not saying something. What is the impact of that behavior and how it affects me, but then also the perception in a larger sense. And then the A stands for action. So what can we do about it, right? If it's a colleague, what can we do to repair this relationship? We work together. We don't always work together sometimes. Maybe we don't always work together, but I'd like to be able to come to you and know that we're going to be able to have a cordial professional conversation. But as also as a leader, what can we do about it? I'm responsible for your performance. So, your performance deficits are affecting, the team and also, how I manage the team. So it's important for me to help you. So what's going on? Talk to me. What's going, and so that A is action. What can we do, to help address the issue? We're not going to, we've talked about the behavior. The behavior is in the past now. The impact is something that's in the present and could be in the future. So how are we going to address the impact through action? Right? Sitting around and talking about it, we're staying in the past. You do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. That's old behavior. I don't want that old behavior. I want new behavior. How can we establish new behavior? And so to be able to work through it together, sometimes it's, well, you never told me exactly, what it meant to be on time. Or, when I rolled my eyes, it wasn't about what you were saying. It's about, the organization and how they always have us do these things and they always, move the goalposts. And I actually feel bad that you have to be the one to tell us that. Okay, so I didn't know that, right? I'm taking it personal by you rolling your eyes. My first impression is it's something I said. So to have the conversation, how often do you find out it's not about you, right? And it's about something else. So the action is okay. So well, the next time that happens, if you roll your eyes and lean over, everybody else sees that. And so, if I ask if there's any questions or if we have an open conversation, if you could offer that, or if you could just wait until after the meeting and come talk to me in private, if that's your preference, that's cool, right? But, your responses have different impacts. It might have landed on me in a certain way, it might have landed on other people in different ways. So just recognize that the way that you handle things have an impact. So
Mhm.
what can we do to address that? That's the action. And then the F is either feedback or follow up. So how do you feel about this? What are your concerns? What do you think we can do to make this work? When are we going to check in on this? Right. So, we have, biweekly meetings. So the next time we have a meeting, let me know how it's going. In the meantime, if something else is an issue, please come address it, before we have the meeting. It's that important, right? So CBIA plus F, right? The context, behavior, the impact of that behavior, the action that we're going to do to address that behavior, and then the F is feedback and follow up.
Love it.
So yeah, this is something that, like I said, I'm non-confrontational by nature. I want everyone to get along. When people don't get along, it hurts my soul. But, as 10 years as a manager, I also know that you can't let things just happen without addressing them. The standard that you accept is the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And what is that going to do to your team? What is that going to do to your perception of your leadership style? What's it going to do to the bottom line? Right. So staying on task, that specific behavior, right? When it's a specific thing that happened, that's something we can address. When it's, you've been having attitude lately, there's a whole can of worms that we're opening up there and people can get defensive. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so one of the things that came to mind here is silence is a reinforcement. Silence is a reinforcement. So if I say nothing, especially from a leadership perspective, leaderships and leaders, they see things happening, but sometimes they're like, oh, it's not my spot to intervene. Maybe their supervisor should take care of it. Maybe, oh, that's not my team. I don't need to worry about it. But silence is a reinforcement. And so when you see something happening or a conflict happening and you don't address it, we avoid it, it's a direct approval of that behavior. And we all know people like in the workplace. I always use the sassy Sallies. Sorry for all the Sallies out there. This is a fake character, but like a sassy Sally that maybe is really good at her job, but she's got an attitude and she belittles people. And when you're like, oh man, sassy Sally, she's really aggressive. And everybody's like, that's just how she is. We just all ignore it. It's telling Sally that that behavior is acceptable and there's no consequence for it, which we have to be accountable for that as leaders because we have allowed that particular behavior by avoiding it, right? Because if I talk to Sally, she starts crying or she makes a scene or whatever. So I don't want to address it. So I'll just avoid it. Silence is a reinforcement. The second thing that I really appreciated about that method is being behavior based. Too often in conflict, it becomes personal and you were, it becomes a personal attack. But if you stick to fact based behavior, then it's hard for people to argue with what they said or what they did, but it's very easy for them to argue with your interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say to me, Tiffany, you were rude to me yesterday, I'm like, actually, I didn't say the rude thing I was thinking. You should be grateful that I didn't say the thing that would have been rude. I didn't say it. So actually, I was kind to you. But if you said to me, Tiff, you told me to kick rocks with no socks, and the impact of that is that it made me feel, belittled or that you weren't interested in my perspective, then in that sense, I can own that because I did tell you to kick rocks with no socks. So I can hear that versus you were rude. So being behavior based, I think, is incredibly important because it takes the blame and the personality out of it. And it becomes more objective and people can oftentimes hear it. They may not hear it the first time. You might have to repeat a couple of times. And I would just caution that this is a conversation. It's going to have two ways. So you have to be open to hearing what that other person's perspective is because they may give you some more context that you don't have that may change the way that you think about it. And so if you go into one of these like feedback type conflict resolution conversations with I'm right and they're going to walk away and they're going to know how I feel, then you might want to wait until you have the right goal in mind, which is ultimately resolving the issue. And that means you have to be open to your contribution. They may share something with you that you didn't know, and you have to be open to that and still come to, again, a consensus of how do we want to manage this in the future? Like, what do you need from me and what can I do for you? And here's what I need from you. And whatever it may be, being open to that. Without that humility, and I know I keep using that word, but without that humility to hear your part in it, it's going to stay in conflict perpetually. And it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And at some point, like you mentioned before, maybe I'm at the fourth obstacle. I'm done talking. At this point, it's gotten too hard. I've shared with you this time and that time and that time, like how that behavior affects me, and you keep doing it. At that point, I may not want to talk to you about it anymore. And so now we get into those like passive aggressive stances where, we cause each other harm to make a point versus what's in the best interest. And I think that happens to a lot of people. They may just not even, you might not know you're passive aggressive. You might not know, but you might be. You might be passive aggressive.
Yeah. Conflict isn't always, the verbal or physical. It's also, like you mentioned, non-action, apathy, right? What's not said. Conflict lies in that as well.
I heard something years ago. I don't know how like you feel about like training and information, but I feel like the universe gives me what I need when I need it. I'm not always open, but I've been really fortunate that opportunities have come up when I least expect it or when I probably need it the most. So I went to a training on conflict resolution years ago. And what was really interesting is that the timing of it, it was a leadership development program. And we were doing like a class a month for over a 9-month period or something like that. So nonetheless, the day that we had to come to this training on conflict resolution, I had just gotten into a big fight with my partner where I was deciding whether or not I wanted to continue the relationship. Like I had decided that morning I was done. wasn't doing this anymore, wasn't the life I wanted. Um, and so rightfully so, it was conflict resolution. So, and I was in deep in conflict. So the instructor, and I really wish I remembered his name because he kind of changed the trajectory of my life, but I couldn't remember his name if you asked me. But he said, to manage conflict, you have three options. You change it, you live with it, you leave it. That's it. Those are your options. And so what can you do to change it? Right? How can you communicate? How can you change your perspective? How can you change your mindset? Can you develop skills around it? What is it that you can change about the conflict? If you can't change it, then can you live with it? And to live with it, you have to truly surrender to the reality of it and not hold a grudge or not hold resentment. So you've got to just accept it for what it is and say, that's what it is, and I'm okay with it. You live with it. And then the third option, if you can't change it and you can't live with it, the only other option you have is to leave it. And so that hit me like, bam, right in my soul, like right as soon, because I was like, I'm ready to leave it, right? I'm leaving. I'm not doing this anymore. And then I thought, oh my God, but really, what have I done to try to change it? I keep doing the same stuff and managing things in the same way. I haven't responded any differently and I haven't communicated any differently. And so it's not changing, but I'm not doing anything to change it. So what do I need to do to change it? And then I also started to think about some of the things that I was upset about. And I'm like, in the grand scheme of things, is this really a big deal or am I making it a big deal? Is it something I can live with? Because leaving it was what I was ready to do, but I didn't really want to do that. But that was my wash my hands and be done with it. But taking the same patterns of behavior into the next relationship or the next workplace or the next company, right? Like I'm never really resolving anything. And so that's, I think, the beginning of where I told you I really did a deep dive into how I manage conflict because the way I had done it for my whole life was not working for me anymore. And I didn't want the outcomes that I had where I just left and moved on to the next thing and just started the pattern of ugly all over again. So how do I do different? And I think this is a skill set that a lot of people need to grow in, leaders especially, is how do you approach conflict? And there's so many resources out there. Like you gave a beautiful model. I really love that model with all of the alphabet soup that you gave us, the CBIQLMNOP, whatever it was. I love that. I love that model. But there's so many other ways of approaching conflict that, again, you find the way that works for you and your personality, but avoiding it or not acknowledging it doesn't make it go away. It oftentimes just compounds it and makes it acceptable. And so we don't always have comfort with conflict, and this is a skill set that you can develop. So for leaders, if I can give a few resources that might be helpful for anybody who's looking at like developing skill in conflict resolution or at least like person to person conversations. There's a really great book by Kim Scott, Radical Candor. Radical Candor is a great book. Anything by Brene Brown, but Daring Greatly is a great book about being vulnerable and having those vulnerable conversations. There's some framework that's available it's called World Class Relationships for Work and Home. That's a workshop. And then there's a book that goes along with it by Patty Howell and Ralph Jones. I think I might have gotten his name wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's it. But it's a couple that have this beautiful framework for like one-on-one relationships and conversations, both work and at home. So that's a great resource. And there's another book that I love. It's got a funny name, but it's really insightful. Dealing with People You Can't Stand. Dealing with People You Can't Stand. And it's by Dr. Rick Brinkman and Dr. Rick something else. I should have probably researched these before I give them out there, but I always say the Dr. Ricks. But Dealing with People You Can't Stand. Very, very insightful book with personality, like dealing with personality things. So if there's a lot of relationship conflict, it helps you kind of understand a little bit more about where other people might be coming from so you can see beyond the behavior and see the need And then that helps facilitate that conversation. Like, how do I help you get your needs met while I'm still getting my needs met? So these are just a couple of the ones that come to the top of my head around like conflict, but it's a skill that you have to develop if you're going to be a good leader, because conflict is always going to happen in your workplace. It's inevitable, because anytime that you have people, people are complex and people are nuanced and people have different, again, biases and preferences and common sense and thought processes. And there has to be a way to navigate around that. So even if we don't always agree with each other, we're it doesn't mean that we're not playing for the same team. We can find ways to, again, engage in that dialogue where at the end of it people say, maybe I didn't get everything I want, but I feel comfortable with what we talked about and I can see that other perspective and I'm ready to commit to it, which is what we'll talk about next, is the commitment. But it really comes back to, do I have enough trust where I feel like I can engage in those conversations, whatever method you choose? Am I personally invested in resolving the issue, whether changing it, living with it, or eventually leaving it? Can I take that first step and not wait for somebody else to do it? Can I take accountability and own up to it, and try to resolve some of this conflict? And again, like you said, for some people it's easier than others. But for me, again, you asked earlier, what are my triggers? Feeling attacked is one of my triggers, and one of the things I'm still working on, is not taking it personal. And even if I don't love the package that it comes in, I'm trying to be open to the message, even if I don't love the delivery, right? I want to accept the gift of information and not be too invested in how it was delivered to me. And that's, again, a work in progress.
Cool. Well, so I have a couple resources as well, um, along with, with the resources you had. Learning.org has a real cool, it's an 8-minute video, but then also it's a workshop. It's a free download PDF on difficult conversations, and it's a 7-step process to having a conversation, having a courageous conversation. And very often people miss parts of that process that help them to realize, oh, wow, so maybe if I did this, it would definitely be important. The last piece is to commit, right? So to commit on how we're going to make this last, not just after this conversation. And then also, if anybody's interested, in some diagnostics, right? The TKI, conflict, conflict modes by, Kilman and Thomas. It's a great diagnostic to utilize where you can identify what is your natural, or your go-to conflict mode, and how important it is to recognize and diversify those different conflict modes so that we use them appropriately. I mean, because each one can be used appropriately. It's just when we lean on one or two of them, when others, are there, I think that can be a challenge. So those are just a couple. If we're going to leave with questions, Steph, I really like your conversation on the three options, right? So I would say, as a leader, how do you approach conflict, right? And think of a conflict that you're dealing with. Is it something that you want to change? And if you do want to change it, what's something that you can do to change it? And based off what we talked about, right? That self introspection, right? How we interact with others, what we know about others, and to maybe have a model to be able to make it behavior based, right? Is it something you can live with? And if you're going to really live with it, like you mentioned, is it something that is not going to cause me to react emotionally, or is it going to change the way that I approach interacting with this person? It truly is something that I'm not just putting up with, but I recognize it's something that is not a hill that I need to die on, and it's something that's worth moving forward. And then, or, is it something that you want to leave? And if you want to leave it, what is your exit strategy? Right. So, is it something that's worth leaving? What's the consequences of you leaving it? Who is it going to affect and impact? Right. So really having that conversation with those three. I mean, think of a conflict you're in. Is it something you want to change? Is it something that you can live with? Or is it something that you're ready to leave?
Mhm.
And so those are the questions, I thought, what do you think, Tiff? Is that
I say find a way to stay in joy, right? Stay in joy and figure out like how to make it better. And if you can't do that, then your only other option is to leave in peace and maybe go do something else. Um, and look, I don't want to, I'm not a Swiftie, per se, like Taylor Swift. I think she's cool, but I can't say I am a die-hard Swiftie, and I don't want to disrespect the Swiftie community. I don't want no Swiftie problems, but I will say in conflict to take some of her words, and that is, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me." And sometimes in conflict, you might be the problem. And I think acknowledging that you might be part of that problem is I think the first step in conflict, because again we want to be right, and when we feel the need to always be right, we become righteous and we stop learning. And so we have to, in that, change it, live with it or leave it. Part of that changing it is changing yourself and really thinking about how you're actively contributing to that dynamic, and being willing to be vulnerable enough and trust enough that relationship that you may need to adapt to make it better. And that's not giving in, or, it's not like taking anything away from you. It's really trying to, again, contribute to the greater good. And there's got to be some give and take. And if you want someone to be able to give so that you can take the benefit of them adapting and changing, you have to be willing to do the same. Otherwise, the conflict is going to stay there and it's going to grow and grow and grow. So I say this is like, I'm going to ask my last question. What are some of maybe the conflicts in your life that you can stop talking about people, and instead maybe talk to them instead? Because if we're really trying to get to the root of the problem, people can't change a situation that they don't have full awareness around. And so if we're not telling them what we need, then they may never be able to meet that need if we're not expressing it. And we have to be able to share what we need and not do a tit for tat where I told you what I need and you didn't give it to me. Therefore, now I'm going to retaliate and make your life miserable. Like, decide who you want to be in the conflict. Who do you want to be? And that it's different for every person. I'm not going to judge what you decide. I just know, for me, I know that in conflict, I can be brutal. And like I mentioned before, that's not how I want to be known. And so the only way that I can change that is to change me. And that changes everything. So
cool? No,
I'm keeping it real today. Don't piss me off today. Keeping it real.
I hear you. And you can't hold somebody to an expectation that they don't already know.
Right.
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 So, yeah, cool. All right. Well, so we've covered the second rung of the pyramid, and we have three more to go as we go along in our journey together. So, our next episode, we will talk about commitment. And
Love it.
yep. And so, all right. Thank you very much for being here with us this episode. And I'm Carl.
Okay.
And keep it real.
For sure.